What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Miss Ari's Unqualified Opinions. I'm Ryan Selkis at 2-Bit Idiot. I have a very special guest today. She is the CEO of Binance US. Most of you probably know her as an award-winning dancer. She also spent some time at Ripple. We're going to come up with a ton of questions that cover Catherine's illustrious career in crypto, outside of crypto. Very excited to have this conversation. But Catherine, for starters, tell us what happened with that dance.
Well, there's a bit of a backstory, but then there's not much. It all happened around a lot of fate. So I had a 14-year career in dance when I was little, and I was rejected from the Orlando Magic Junior Dancers when I was 9. And I've held on to that grudge. So when I realized that the NBA weekend was going to be in Chicago, one of the hotbeds for crypto, and I have a strong belief that, basketball, dance, and Bitcoin can bring the world together. I said, let's go, let's engage the crowds, let's get people excited about Binance US. And so we just went and got, 2 tickets randomly to the celebrity game. We're like, okay, we're going to try this out. If it doesn't work, I'll say I had fun and we'll not write it off as marketing. And so sure enough, right before the game starts, some guy with a headset comes up and he goes, "Ma'am, we've been seeing you dance to all the songs in your seats. Would you like to participate in a halftime dance off?" And
so this was, you didn't have an inside track. This was a meritocracy.
No.
This was an actual,
this was StubHub to the hardwood. And so he immediately was like, "Yes, absolutely. Please let me pass this form over to my lawyer." Then I'm walking, and it's a 12-year-old boy that I was competing against. And I mean, I knew what the audience wanted, and they wanted a 12-year-old boy, not a budding, CEO of crypto to win this competition. But I left everything out there on that court, and I'm not disappointed in my performance. So I got to dust off some pirouettes and some items that I held on to for about 20 years. But it was.
Wait, so you're telling me that was the losing dance?
That was the losing dance.
Oh my goodness.
But it's because I didn't floss. So, I got to know my audience next time, and having original choreography is just not enough for them. So it was, he repeated a TikTok dance that was pretty well known, and the crowd went crazy. So I lost to him and then a guy named Dancing Dan. So I feel like, if anything, it was a step in closure for myself. But I also think that this isn't going to be the last time you'll see me at half court.
Well, if you can't already tell why everybody loves Catherine, hopefully that brief lead gives you a sense. Catherine, let's. I always like to start.
Coley.
Coley, let's do it. I know most people do, but I'm not sure the rules here. All right, so Coley. So I like to start, aside from dance stories, with every individual trip down the rabbit hole with our guests, because they're all very different. And I know it's a little bit of a cliched way to start, but I do think it's important to give people context for how you got to this point, right? And in particular, how you went from not being in crypto to being in crypto, which is the much larger leap. And obviously, I believe your start was with Ripple. But can you just talk about that path and what you did previously and how we got here today?
Sure. I'm super excited to share this with your listeners. They've been such a devout part of shaping the crypto ecosystem. So it's exciting to share this with them. But I began really I'm an experiential learner. And in order for me to understand things, I have to do them. There are auditory learners, there are visual learners, and then there are kinetic. And I happen to be the last one. So I really, in order to understand how this world works, had to throw myself into situations to understand them. And one of the things I couldn't grasp was how the world worked. And I'd taken courses, et cetera, and always had something in the back of my head that I learned, and it was, follow the money and history will teach you. And so the best way to follow the money was to put yourself really in the middle of the largest flows in the world, which was the foreign exchange markets, and going onto a trading floor and really witnessing what that was. I read a book called Liar's Poker, and it changed my life. So I said, maybe that's the best way for me to understand how this world works, is seeing really what people are identifying as news and what they're trading on, and what swings we're seeing in reaction and how they affect everybody else. So I got my start on the Hong Kong trading floor at Morgan Stanley, covering the onshore Asian currencies, understanding that after the Asian financial crisis, these countries had restrictions and limitations put on them to safeguard against potential attacks from others. So it was a very unique situation where my counterparts in New York barely knew the difference between Malaysia's system and Thailand's system. And yet I was super aware of those niche differences, the opens and closes to sync with their equities markets, the ability of having like an omnibus account versus having to do individual trades. There's another world out there that is really telling to why these economies are developing in a certain way. So I found it super fascinating and just enjoyed that pace and the understanding, and had a real pulse on how the world worked. But the world was changing. So during my time, I witnessed that one of the jobs that I had was extremely manual. I had to move between a Bloomberg terminal to a Reuters terminal. And so no matter the automation that I provided, I couldn't skip that step. And, you just kind of sat there frustrated going like, so this is job security. They need me. I'm the rotation of my body over here to type. Is there something I can create mechanical that could do this for them? But you just noticed that there were some frictions along the system that really held things back from going to be fully electronic. Funny we used the word electronic describing things as fast moving back then, where now it's all digital. So electronic trading was taking off. The ability to put algos in the hands of your customers rather than facilitate a TWAP or time weighted average, going through that on their own was something that was empowering. Your user or your customer really enjoyed being able to monitor and watch their activity and understood that they were getting the best price. They weren't having a middleman, take things off based on how they felt really. And that was something that we were seeing as a scaring factor on the sell side, but an empowering factor when you thought about the market as a whole. So I really pushed forward and dug into how electronic trading and the FX platforms were going to be helping. But I was oftentimes told, like, slow down. This is ruining our, enjoyable jobs as voice brokers to some extent. So when I witnessed all of that evolution, I kept in the back of my head saying, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a faster way. I don't want any little girl to wake up and say, today I'm going to type on a Bloomberg terminal and rotate and type on a Reuters terminal. And that's going to be why I went to school and why I continue to wake up every day. So the ability to automate that or make it move in a way that everyone could access it was really exciting to me. So that's truthfully, I kind of think of it as I've been training for the Olympics. Those were the early days that got me to say, I'm fired up about increasing the rate to which we can offer institutional quality services down to the individual and streamline the whole process in itself. It boggles my mind that 3,000 people, which is still small. That's the amount of sell-side employees there are in foreign exchange. 3,000 people were dedicated to moving other people's money from one place to another.
And, ultimately that should come down further and further because moving money from, point A to point B in Forex I don't know that the number of people actually changes. It's just the medium and the forum through which these assets are changing hands is going to be different, and it will continue to get different.
Well, it can also change there's like one person that is facilitating that trade for a hedge fund. Then there's 16 people dedicated to that one trade. So you've got compliance, you've got your back office, you've got your settlement team, and if you can streamline those roles and provide alternatives for people, we could have far more fulfilling and motivating experiences in life or careers. And so I think there's a lot of those bottlenecks that are cost centers that could be eliminated and really give people a sense of empowerment.
It's funny. 2015, there was this era of blockchain, not Bitcoin, right after the crash. And the pitch was basically about eliminating cost centers, right? That was the big thing that all the enterprise players got excited about. And then lo and behold, another entire market cycle passes in crypto. And I think the reason that the public chains are so much faster, aside from just the incumbents move slower by default, is that 2017 was all about, I can make a lot more money with crypto, right? Whether it's speculative, trading, whether it's market making, whether it's, creating an ICO and selling it and liquidating it. That is a much more compelling reason to adopt a new technology, particularly in finance, than just we're going to eliminate a cost center, right? It's like the vitamin versus painkiller.
Right.
How do you get people addicted to like the ICO drugs? And there's a lot of bad things about that addiction, but you're starting to see some of the fruit born in kind of the next market cycle. Where did you come in full time to crypto? So I guess what were the exposure points that before you made the switch, and then what finally made you take the leap and join Ripple?
Yeah, in Hong Kong in 2013, Bitcoin was kind of something you bought on your PA just to watch as almost like a plant. And you're kind of like, it's going to either grow or it's going to die. None of us really have too much skin in this game to worry about it. The other aspect of it was you were seeing and beginning to see a lot of activity taking place from these sell-side analysts in Hong Kong, one of them being Arthur Hayes, who was a good buddy back when he was at Deutsche. And other people were taking notice. So it was triggering the minds of these trader types who were beginning to see there's real value in what you mentioned, the ARB, the speculation, the ability to get behind this budding marketplace and apply what we already knew from a larger market perspective. So I kind of had a cheat sheet in seeing the 12th chapter of the book before the foreword was written. And so I kind of knew how the book would end, and it would only be a matter of, did everyone that knew that story conclusion want to speed up the story, or did they want to milk it for a little while because a few of us weren't around in the 80s when markets were roaring. So I took that as an interesting thing, but I really jumped in the summer of 2017. I was at Silicon Valley Bank catering a lot of these fintechs that were beginning to use Bitcoin as a means of moving money between places like Veeam and Wire. Those were some of the budding names that I was hearing about, and I was like, I want to be on the upside of that. I don't want to be sitting here just asking them if they're hedging their FX when I could be helping them move this forward. So that's where I saw, I had a LinkedIn alert for Ripple and popped up and asked exactly what I had in terms of my experience. And oftentimes you see something and you go, that's not really aligned, but I'm the one that knows that, so I'm going to go for it. So it was the opening role was for head of investor relations, and they asked for 5 to 7 years of FX experience. And I said, that's a perfect spot. But let me see what I can work with them. So moved into their markets team. Yeah.
Yeah, and in particular, so when you say markets team, I mean this was the XRP, institutional liquidity angle. So this is XRapid, and this is the digital asset, not just the XCurrent.
Yeah, in fact, I never talked to the bank clients that were on RippleNet. I was purely dedicated to XRP and the markets that it was going to be involved in, working with exchanges, market makers, institutional buyers, really understanding how we could make this a liquid enough digital asset so that other things could take place, such as corporate flows.
Coley, as you know, no one from Ripple will talk to me. And I'm not going to comment one way or the other. I understand why that's the case. What do people not understand about Ripple and its role with XRP, and why it's so functionally important to the underlying system that maybe they should, or I guess what would be the bull case for XRP, the case for Ripple as an entity in terms of its go-to-market strategy that isn't well told, or at least every single time it gets told, it just gets shot down from every single skeptic within crypto, fairly or unfairly. I guess I'd love to hear your take on what misconceptions there might be without getting you into trouble.
Yeah, no, there's I'm on Binance US, so I can't get too in trouble, I don't think. But the misunderstanding, a lot of it comes from when you're starting something out, there's kind of 3 things that you can have, but you can't have all 3. And so we saw Bitcoin start out with this, and the dilemma is you can be convenient, you can be secure, or you can be scalable. And so scalable, secure, and accessible. And so that's really where we saw Ripple diverge when XRP was coming about, where the idea was if they can start it off, it's going to be a little bit different, but it's going to be able to move faster, be cheaper, have a different mechanism to which it can approve transactions. And that is going to be better off for the use case that it was intended. And when I looked at Bitcoin as an FX person, Bitcoin wasn't the answer to my dreams. It was clunky, it was slow, it was expensive. I kind of looked at it and was like, you're never going to get a better rate for dollar mix through Bitcoin at that situation. But I did see it working in other use cases. But for XRP's pure use case of being a medium of exchange that can quote unquote zip value over faster, that is really where it had a bad rap because it was different from Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. But it was birthed from original, Bitcoiners. Like you think about taking something and trying to modify it, and mm-hmm. It's amazing the reaction was so negative rather than like, oh great, an upgrade. And so I think that's just that compounded over the years of getting a terrible reputation for it. But really, like, would we get that upset if Lyft came to town and Uber was the first one out? Mm-hmm. Why and what happened? And I wasn't there in the beginning days of what made it not land as an upgrade. But I was there for 2 years to try to clean up the image and make it worthwhile in terms of, from a market's perspective, usable.
Now, usability is kind of loaded with respect to XRP and XRapid in particular. And I want to put a finite bookend to this so we're not spending the whole conversation on Ripple. But
please, we got more exciting things.
Exactly. But I do want to ask one clarifying question, which is that right now people think about XRapid versus XCurrent, and it's unclear if there's marginal cost savings, right? Or like how much of it do you need, like the actual units of XRP versus how much of it is just kind of like cramming, faux grawing this digital asset that's not necessary to generate a lot of the same savings that, quite frankly, the institutional protocol is capable of delivering, and that's been borne out by all the customers that Ripple's been able to win. Is that still a misconception as well?
They've changed some of their things since I've left. So I think XRapid's now called like ODL, or on-demand liquidity, and the other suite of products is now rolled into RippleNet. So I need to do a little bit more homework to understand how those things have pivoted. But the idea of being able to send funds faster through traditional rails was definitely something Ripple was working on, creating a faster messaging platform. So that you were able to send real data across to have more information and have that kind of send in an immediate way that would be super useful, as is in the current market. The benefit of using XRP for transactions across borders was that you'd be able to have liquid pools around the world that would naturally have that funding amount in them, so that you wouldn't have to pre-fund your account in Mexico. So you'd be able to basically zip something over to a Mexican exchange, and it would have the natural liquidity of digital assets there, so that you wouldn't have to fund your pesos in advance. That is a huge amount of what businesses have as a penalty. In order to have a foreign entity, oftentimes you have to have a foreign bank account through a correspondent banking network, and then that takes 6 months. Sometimes in some countries you have to have a person on the ground. You can't just have a phone-in bank account. And then you've got to fund it. So that's capital that's tied up. And especially as small startups are beginning, that's a lot of allocated resources to places that aren't helping you drive your business or increase your revenue. So I think that's where the benefit can come from, is not being able to tie up those resources around the world. Are we at the stage where it's going to be instantaneous and startups can immediately create an account on an exchange and zip over XRP to their Mexican counterpart? No, and I think we're working on that, or they're working on that. I'm working on it to some extent because I'm building out the infrastructure that's required to allow for an on-ramp for users to access any digital asset. So
that was why I did want to drill down a little bit on XRP, because Binance is handling hundreds now. What is the total supported asset count?
So on Binance.com, way more. On Binance US, 30 plus.
Yeah, and you're still playing catch up, and some of that's for regulatory reasons. But the global platform, you're dealing with hundreds or at least 100 plus different assets. How do you think about liquidity between all the different stable coins that are available and something like XRP or Bitcoin or the other non-stable crypto assets that for a very long time until Tether were the rails, right? Like that,
Yeah.
you settled using Bitcoin, you settled, in some cases using XRP, but basically until Tether took over in 2016, 2017, when the ICO bubble really started to percolate, like, Poloniex and Bittrex, like that was really when Tether took off. And now, of course, you have other, more legitimate options if you want to think about it that way.
Regulated.
But regulated, you've got this crazy spectrum of stable coins, and we'll talk a little bit about Virgo, right?
No, but I like that. Venus.
Venus, yes.
We're not on the horoscopes train.
Well, you kind of are, because Venus is like the governing body of Libra or whatever.
We'll do with constellations, but we're not on not on horoscopes.
Well, so we'll talk about
astrology
that
or astronomy, not astrology.
Yeah, right. Well, so we'll talk about that a little bit, but for starters, why don't we talk about the liquidity question, right? Like, so what infrastructure are you building, not just at the Binance global level, but for US in particular, to actually facilitate some of these settlements? Is it XRP? Is it Bitcoin? Is it, where is the volume going?
Yeah, I think stablecoins I admit they were a frustrating thing for me to see come out of what was already built and gain such adoption. And I call it like the tricycle training wheels element of people were too afraid of understanding a universal digital asset that they had to go digitize the derivative of what they were comfortable with. And so they went, okay, we're going to, digitize the US dollar. It's going to be backed by the dollar 1-to-1. It's going to have, everything's going to be denominated in basically US dollars in terms of how you're pricing things. And it's still going to have, the regulation inside the United States determining this. And so it really did validate the use case for XRP of people wanting some form of a digital asset to move money around the world. The downside of it was it didn't alleviate the concern that you had with having something be regulated by the United States. So for the sake that anytime someone crosses an FX spread and it goes through the US dollar, which most things are all priced against the US dollar, it's then privy to US sanctions and further ruling that involves the United States. Most people in the United States would say, hooray, that's fantastic. But to those that are trying to get things through on a, between Pakistan and Brazil, you're going to have, you can't trade if it's a US bank holiday and settlements are closed. And you're like, but our world doesn't involve any part of America. And we're still following their rules when we're transacting. And I thought, and I still think that there is a better world where people are not having to be tied to the US dollar, tethered for that reason. And so that's where I still think Bitcoin has its benefits and XRP has its benefits, but perhaps they were just too provocative for people to connect the dots into seeing why that made sense. You face this a lot with companies that are going global and they pay their foreign employees or get their revenues in US dollars rather than the local currency. And that in its own is comforting to the accounting side. So people are excited by it. But it does bleed cash when you see volatility in those local currencies. And it does burden your end consumer in those local areas that has to find a way to convert coins. Usually the burden on them is the FX rate that they get, which is usually terrible. And it just doesn't create a super pure experience that I think we could get to. So with stable coins, you're offering that similar thing. You're going to be able to send dollars around the world, which is super convenient. People already do it. And it's going to be in a digital form, which I think is helpful if that's adopted for people. But it's not the pure case of a universal currency that is going to be determined by the pure fluctuations of the market players themselves.
What's disappointing is that we haven't really seen one of those pure versions, I guess, for lack of a better term, of a stable coin get mass market adoption or even gain the ability to get off the ground in some cases. Like we have Tether, which is dollar denominated and it's held in the shell game of corporate accounts. We have USDC, which can get shut down, I guess, conceivably at any time, right? Because it's a fully regulated stable coin. Then you had Libra, which is probably the first time, and that still would have been heavily regulated, but it was still the first time that you had a non-US dollar denominated stablecoin. After that, there's a pretty steep drop off where the only real permissionless dollar pegged or stable asset is probably DAI right now. And the liquidity on that is nowhere, right? So I guess maybe this is a place to chat a little bit more about Venus. Yes, it might be regulated, but if you're talking about fiat currencies, right? Like fiat and like pegged currencies, they're almost by definition, they're going to have to be regulated, right?
Yeah. So it's people, opting in to have a fully regulated digital asset that's based on the dollar. That's, it's, as I call it, it's their training wheels. You're not going to be on your own. You're not going to have, full freedom on that effect. It is going to be regulated by, BUSD is regulated by the New York DFS. Available on 43 plus exchanges, not only including the Binance ecosystems. But you're going to be having that access to something that is pegged to the dollar, regulated by the United States. And that's what you're asking for. So I don't think you can push it to be more than it really is. If you want something beyond that, then that's why you have digital assets that are hopefully self-sovereign.
There's so many different,
but I think it's a positive shift.
Yeah.
People are going to see that with BUSD, you can get, up to, like above the interest rate earnings that you would get by holding fiat. So that's going to be a natural flight to something that can be a yielding benefit for you. And why is this such? Because we can, digital assets can be more functional. And I think that's where you're going to see, hopefully, the adoption take place of people recognizing that you can do more with your assets when they're digitized than you can when they're under your mattress.
Amen. I want to switch gears a little bit and just talk about the pace of new features at Binance as a global platform, and then how these things gradually translate to Binance US or any regionalized subsidiary or project. I'm not sure, how you define these.
We're an independent, we're an independent entity, but we are able to license the technology and the tech stack of the largest exchange, Binance Global. So the benefit of that is that although we're catering everything through kind of a keyhole of the United States regulation, we're able to quickly build things that are already super, stress tested beyond what we can actually do in the United States. You think about the volumes that Binance Global sees, and you question whether our matching engine can handle it. And you're looking at, our daily volume is a fraction of the, 1.8 to $3 billion of trading that goes through Binance's matching engine daily. So I think that's one of the benefits, is that our technology is stress tested in the largest arena by some of the most sophisticated and beginner players. So we're able to, I guess we launched in September 2019 with nothing. And with the patience of our followers, we were able to launch our app in January 2020. So available on Android and iOS, we allow for the access through US dollars, 3 ways, ACH debit cards and wire payments with FDIC insurance coverage into 30 plus digital assets. And then we also offer USDC conversion direct to BUSD to allow for, as you said, those stablecoin folks to be able to, move money quickly between exchanges. So
I want to ask this, and I've been trying to think the last 20 seconds of the best way to phrase it without it coming across as insulting, but
oh, please try me.
but let's try it, and I think you'll see what I mean. When I think of Binance,
I'll turn this podcast off if I'm insulted.
Challenge accepted. Binance Global has such a massive team of contributors. It's got a massive head start. Binance US is less than a year old now, right? And when I think about the two, I think about the technical innovation happening at the Binance Global level, and then the regulatory innovation happening at any of the affiliate entities, right? Binance US included. I'm wondering if you agree with that, or if that sells short a lot of what you do at Binance US as a team, because right now, maybe this is just from a regulatory standpoint, The feature set, the assets that are supported, the services, all seems to be a subset of the larger platform. So it's almost like you're fighting on these different regulatory fronts on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and just trying to turn on features that already exist that you can license out. Tell me I'm wrong, or help clarify or provide the nuance around what the reality is versus that naive impression of how Binance US in particular works.
Not insulted, so good work. The real position that I'm in right now is I want to make sure that Americans have access to how the rest of the world is trading, and the sophistication that they are receiving on a global level doesn't leave behind America. So for you to say that, you know, our technology seems rather similar or, you know, nearly identical in terms of our API, the endpoints change, that's a positive. That means that you're not falling behind in terms of the strategy that you're able to implement on a US platform versus a global platform. And so you're able to then have a kind of a cross talent or skill set for people to be building on top of our APIs. And it not be a drastically different or dumbed down experience.
Is there anything that Binance US has taken the lead on in terms of driving a new feature set, or is
Absolutely.
it? Okay.
I mean, we've streamlined KYC for our users in a way that gets them through the door much faster. That's one of the aspects that we realized is a huge hurdle of opening in the United States. We have to go through KYC and AML for all of our individuals and really understand it at a much more granular level than you'd need to at a global perspective. So making sure that that doesn't slow us down and isn't a roadblocker. The other aspects of it are the processes that we've put in place. Every single member of my team has come from a regulated entity in financial services or tech or gaming before this. So we come with an awareness that we know how the ultimate big dogs operate. And we now get to translate it down to making sure it's a usable individual experience. So being able to come through and say, okay, I want to be able to move money quickly. What is it that I'm going to be needing? Having ACH as an available option for free on-ramps, having the KYC be streamlined, being able to maintain an easy way to download your transactions so that taxes are easily done in the United States. Those are how we're kind of shifting the mindset of what it is to be an American trader that wants to compete at the global level and not feel like they're being left behind.
Yep.
But it's true. The translation from the global tech stack of margin lending, futures, you name it, that does not translate one for one inside the United States. So it is almost my job and our team's job to translate it in a way that's digestible and also desirable. Not all Americans want a certain type of trading platform that you see the rest of the world demanding for. So
well, and this is also the innovator's dilemma in financial services in the U.S. more generally, right? You have more compliance folks on many of these banking teams than you would on the tech team. So it's kind of consistent, I think, more or less with how financial services works in the U.S. more broadly, and it speaks to a broader question of will we be able to innovate anywhere nearly as quickly as some other areas of the world when it comes to Web3 and digital finance, right? Decentralized finance. How do you think about Binance US's role in pushing the adoption curve for all of the ancillary US-based projects on behalf of the entire ecosystem? Because there are a lot of very talented teams, most of whom I believe are still hamstrung by US regulation. And many of them, even if they're here technically, or said the other way around, even if they're technically based overseas, a lot of the teams are here, and they basically can build here but sell only abroad. You've obviously spent a lot of times on the front lines. Yeah, what is
something
what
that's
is your...
super scary and sad a little bit, that you're seeing people fearful of launching in places where they could make a huge impact, and having to go, quote unquote, the easy way out, which is really the difficult way out, and launch to an audience outside of your home jurisdiction. And so that's where we're really paying close attention to what are the projects in the United States that would actually benefit a US trading population and graduate to a global or an international use case. And therefore you have an easy bucket of getting on board with Binance US first, and then being able to launch on a larger global scale with Binance Global. We're playing catch up right now, given we started with 0 assets and now we're launched over 30 plus, going through and evaluating each one of them through our templatized approach of the digital asset risk assessment framework, catering to be aware that these projects need to have longevity inside of the United States, and need to be focused on developing something in such where it's beneficial to a US trader. And that's really where I think projects, they often ask, like, how do I get in touch? How do I get listed, et cetera? And I consciously tell them, be so loud and large inside of the United States that I have to list you. Like I want to know that the demand is really here. If you're building in the shadows and trying to get international adoption first, then you won't get my attention.
If anything, you're probably the riskiest person to ask, right? So it's one thing to get listed overseas, but because the hurdle is that much higher in the U.S., the asset, needs to be so good you can't ignore it, right? To paraphrase.
Right. And so good you can't ignore it. But we're seeing great developments. I mean, Hester Pierce basically was giving the olive branch to these projects, hoping to get majority opinion on it. But just the idea of giving us a grace period before things are able to be secure on where they stand. I think that's a great idea. You think about all these projects, and in that kind of realm of, is it decentralized, secure, and scalable? Those were the 3. Sorry about that. Then you have to focus on 1 or 2 in order to get adoption, and then you can focus on 3. But that's really where I think we're able to have an opportunity for people that are beginning to trade or demanding to get a U.S. audience, and we're here for it. We're open and listening.
So much of the conversation in that gray area has to do with governance and control, right? Both from a technical standpoint and from a network security and financial incentive standpoint. Binance has rolled out staking services. They've pretty quickly become popular because, at least at first, I know you were offering staking for 0 fees. Have you changed that structure?
No.
Still the same.
Still true.
And that has had a natural effect to accrue more assets under management, right? And a greater degree of centralization, particularly for some of these proof of stake systems. If one of the primary gating items to a given project being viewed not a security or being viewed as decentralized and actually useful, if that's so important from a regulatory perspective and just from a community development perspective, how do you think about the Binance's role in providing governance tools or end user tools to actually cast votes and actively participate in these networks versus just turning Binance into a proxy of sorts? This, I think, was the issue with Steam from a couple of weeks ago. So it's highly relevant, maybe not as relevant for Binance US, but you think about that as a precursor of things to come at the very least.
I definitely think it's pivoted my approach to how we're going to be able to provide that. And if that is something that is demanded by our users, or our users purely looking for a venue to which they can allocate those responsibilities and therefore get 100% of the staking rewards. And that is something that we're building out and in consciously deciding, is this what people want on top of a platform where you can get your pool of staking rewards. So we're interested, we're engaged to see, is governance something that people want on top of an easy access for it? Or are they willing to not go for a pooled asset for a larger return on that? I think that we're seeing how staking is a changing the idea of where people are getting involved in digital assets. And you're right, is the attraction factor the rewards and the yield, or is the attraction factor that you have governance and votes and a chance to really be a individual player in it? And if that's the case, then we need to build out a system that allows for that.
Well, I certainly think it's probably mostly about yields and mostly about earning for most users, even if people will dispute that for lawyerly reasons. The bigger question is, how do you prevent Binance from becoming the de facto owner of some of these networks if most of the liquidity is on Binance and is actually being custodied and staked on behalf of users? And I'm certainly not the first person that's brought this up, but at the extreme, if Binance is ubiquitous in terms of its availability, if it's the most liquid platform for some of these trading pairs, in many cases, if it's the platform on which these different teams launched, maybe through the launch pad, what are the risks there, or at what point do you stop supporting a certain percentage of assets, right? Has that come into
Yeah.
play, or how have you thought through that challenge?
No, I see what you're saying there, and it really comes down to the fact that we don't want to be you know the largest player, and now we get the biggest seat at the table. We're really just a venue for which we can facilitate this to take place. And so I think whether CZ and myself kind of view it in a way that we're really here as your marketplace. We're not here as your decision maker on top of the governance. So we'll have to consciously break that down and see what makes sense for it, and where that can be reallocated to the proper use, or have a voting system on our side that can kind of be the electoral college for how we would be voting, if that comes down to the place. But I certainly stand that we're mostly the vessel to which we're allowing buyers and sellers to meet in the market. And at our core, we're a matching engine, not a fist at the table. So,
well, would you create a proxy service, or is that something that you actively think needs to be removed from your responsibilities?
I think that's something we have to think about. We're beginning to see more staking coins come through. We're beginning to see staking actually pick up in adoption. We're beginning to see those pools get larger. So this is something we have to actively take place, especially following the events that you've seen.
That makes sense. And some of these are good problems to have. Most of them are good problems to have.
Most problems are I reinforce with our team, anytime there's frustration, that's actually learning. So it's friction is teaching us how we're actually growing, and the elements to which you see crypto breaking things or having new issues. It allows for not only scar tissue to strengthen that area, but us to really advance where we're going. And I think with staking kind of bringing up these questions and curiosities, you're going to see new governance models built out of it.
So this kind of sits at the intersection with something that you brought up in the very beginning, which I wanted to come back to, and I'm glad we're going to have a chance to. You mentioned, visual, auditory, and experiential learners, right?
Right.
Like you're someone that has to roll up your sleeves, get deep into a problem to actually grapple with it and think about solutions. Is that part of the cultural DNA of Binance, or is that just kind of unique to you? Is that something you screen for? Because things move so insanely fast, it appears, at all levels of the Binance ecosystem.
Yeah, I definitely say I'm not alone in needing to do that, but there's something more that just comes at the core of each person that works on every project, and it's that they are consciously aware of how it's going to be used and well in tuned with the user itself. So everyone has been a person seeking out to find a better infrastructure component, and therefore able to build it within Binance. So instead of people saying, well, what did the focus group say? And what did this? I'm your end user. Like I'm on my phone all day. I want this feature. I want this feature. We don't have to pay a consulting service to tell us what the audience should really be demanding, when all of us are largely the using population that we see growing forward. And I have a big screen on mine, is can my team put themselves in other people's shoes? And is that a way that we can quickly see how it's going to be affecting a different type of user, and then course correct if what we've built is burdensome? And so that's the helpful part. The other part is, we're building a team, and CZ's built a fantastic team that is so able to be independent and build. We're consciously accountable for our own actions, because we're all striving for a larger goal. So the idea of decentralization, they've got over 400 people working in 40 countries. We're kind of the anomaly of having an office here in San Francisco, but we also have an office in DC. That's our bit of decentralization there. But we work in that way because right now we're just a nucleus of the core components that we need. That doesn't stop us from being able to build and bring talent from around the US. So.
Yeah, the decentralized approach sounds good when you have a global organization, but it doesn't really work if you're trying to build a US regulated entity anyway. So it'd be
Well,
tough for you
everyone
to get much
no,
done.
they just need an ops. Well, we've been plenty decentralized before. You know,
Yeah,
around the holidays when I sent everyone home, we were fully decentralized and fully operational, and saw some of our largest volume days. So
yeah.
the ability to get work done and communicate in a way that's far more productive has helped us tremendously get ahead to where we need to be and continue to grow into kind of the par of line that you see in the United States so far. So we've got tremendous work ahead of us. We are only operable in 37 states. I hear that all the time, that how can you be Binance US when you only operate in still the majority of the United States? But we're working on those licenses to get operable in those states. We're pushing forward to increase more of our trading pairs that are demanded by our American traders. And we're continuing to make a seamless approach, whether you're a beginner, whether you're an advanced, whether you're a full-time market maker or trader. So those are the offerings that we're providing. And you know, I'm hungry to see the next generation adopt it in ways that we're going to be able to cater them to this journey, rather than them clunkily find themselves kind of out of last resort going to an exchange.
To that end, are there certain new features or new product lines you want to tease that or hint that might be on the way? It seems like there's something new every week, but anything that's on
Or
the
twice a
horizon?
week sometimes. We will continue to be listing new coins. I think that's exciting. We've rolled out our BUSD conversion from USDC, so that's really easy, with also offering pairs in BUSD, so you can move quickly into those assets. I think you'll be seeing a streamlined approach to how our app is going to be interacting with our users, and that's one thing that we really hope can become less of a you know, differing experience and more second nature with how you're going to be operating in the world. So I look forward to advancing the usability of our app, but also making sure it's just something that becomes part and parcel. I mean, I paid for Girl Scout cookies today with BUSD to someone, and I was like, so much easier than walking down the street and finding dollars and paying them. And so
Girl Scout cookies are the one thing that I don't think anybody is thinking about stockpiling. So good on you.
I'm early, but I think I also hired a guy that he's been I supporting the market for his daughter for a couple of years. So I have to worry about you know, what he's trying to do in terms of her supply and demand there. But can't hate on a supportive father.
Coley, this is one of the beauties of working from home. For those that are watching this live, I am apparently about to just apparate and be elevated into
The
another
light
dimension.
is coming to you. I see that, you know, it's wonderful to see you as an angelic glow right now.
I know.
It's
And
fascinating.
and just in time too, because we're right up about the hour. Is there any?
Wait, what other
one more thing.
features? Yeah, what other features do you think we're going to be able to leverage from Masari from an exchange? We're already so grateful for the research that you guys have put out on each coin, allowing for folks to really dig in and get kind of granularly understanding each token. What else do you think we're going to be able to see in terms of something that will be productive for the whole ecosystem together?
Well, you know, I generally think that, you know, we're optimistic that we're going to be able to work with you as one of the key players in creating some enforceability around some of these disclosure standards that we've been working on. As you know, we've got 75 projects now that have come proactively with very little enforcement teeth to create some of these ongoing disclosures. And I think what we can ultimately do with an exchange like Binance, not just US, but global, is take a lot of the pressure off of the Binance research team to update the disclosures profiles, can free them up to do other macro level research on the one hand. On the other, we can track the developments, some of the things that are happening on governance, technical updates, Forex airdrops. You see the equivalent of corporate actions in the traditional legacy markets. And then, you know, I think it's an open question whether any of the exchanges should or would want to be in the situation where they're serving as a proxy service if they're offering staking. So I'd say those three things, all of which kind of touch on governance and make, you know, Masari serve as less of a Bloomberg, more of a Broadridge for people that are
Okay.
familiar with that business
Yeah.
and legacy,
Yeah.
legacy realm. So,
And the kind of
the
checks and balances for making sure that you don't become the single point of failure, I think, are important too, as we rely more heavily on your Broadridge approach. Yeah.
Well, you know what, if that part of the business is community owned and operated through a DAO, and Binance and some of the other major exchanges are key players, then I think we'll have to wait and see, but that's certainly the future that we've envisioned.
But the light is calling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Coley. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in again. Until next time, this was Coley. Catherine, one more time, what is your Twitter handle?
It's Crypto Coley. So at Crypto Coley and at Binance America.
Check out Coley, follow her, and hopefully you enjoyed this very illuminating conversation as I fade to the lights with Coley from Binance US.
Walk with me.
Walk with me. Until next time. Peace.